Welcome to this morning's webinar. My name is John Leach and I'll be presenting the content for you this morning, which is really about 45 minutes of material around why some e-commerce sites don't succeed like they should. And really what we're going to do this morning is to look at some of the metrics that help us understand that and what's happening in our e-commerce environments. And we'll walk through that framework so that help you understand if you are challenged in growing your e-commerce business, what you need to be looking at and how to manage your way out of that situation. So just some background, my background for those who we haven't met before, and I see one or two familiar names and faces on the attendee list this morning, so that's nice. But my background is I worked for 10 plus years running a large e-commerce business for Lenovo in Europe. So I've gone through many of these challenges as an e-commerce business owner, if you like, and had to figure out answers and learn by experience. And indeed, some of the things I was very skeptical about when we started out, but over the years got to appreciate why these metrics are really, really key. I now work with a variety of clients as part of the WSI global network of digital marketing consultants. And we work with clients of both a small, medium, and indeed large size to help improve their overall digital marketing and digital experience. So what's on our agenda this morning? So we're going to look at a couple of slides to talk about really what you need to, the broader context of e-commerce, because it's still a business after all, and some of the normal business rules still apply. Then the main content, if you like, is really around the 7 metrics that I think you have to really measure and manage. And those 7 metrics split into a group of 4 that looks at your website and your conversion rates, and a group of 3 that looks at your customers or your audience. And when you put those 2 together, then it gives you a good framework for figuring out how well your site is doing. So actually, I forgot to mention at the start is we will be sending out the slide deck afterwards, and we will also be recording this session as well. So anybody that attends will get both of those materials afterwards. So don't worry about having to take copious notes. You will get the material afterwards as well. Okay, so just a couple of context setting slides in terms of, you know, unless you've been living under a stone for the last 12 months, I mean, there's been an awful lot of talk about the growth of e-commerce. Obviously with retail being locked down as part of the global pandemic, there weren't many other options in terms of purchasing for consumers at difficult times. But if you go back, you know, even a year, 18 months, e-commerce was roughly about 23% of the total retail business. And of course, at times that has, you know, flipped over 50% as there simply were no other options available to people. So as we begin to look forward, and I say that with a bit of a smile, as we look forward to, you know, economies opening up and people getting back to something that might have approximated what was normal before, that e-commerce percentage will obviously drop back a little bit, I will believe. But what has probably happened is we have accelerated or jumped forward 2 or 3 years in a progression and a growth that was happening anytime. So the message, and it's a message I've been saying to clients for a long time, is that look, if 25% of even retail business is happening online, and you're not in that space in some way, shape, or form, that's an awful lot of the market to concede entirely to your competitors. So even if it's not your main revenue stream, you need to be in this space because you need to be learning about how to perform in it, what to do correctly, and be ready as your audience and as your customers move in that direction, that you can move with them. But, you know, the thing to remember is that it's still business and some basic rules still apply. And, you know, how we do business in the real world, the real challenge is to transform that experience so that it still works online, and how to create a really good retail or customer experience online again. And these are 4 or 7 things that, you know, you'll recognize as a business person in the first instance. And the first one is, and it's one that we come across a lot, that people don't spend enough time thinking about as they go into, a new e-commerce setup. But you must know your target customer, and you must have a message that appeals to that audience, and it has to be specific. So too many people, just go into this, thinking about, let's start an e-commerce site, put stuff up on the web, people will come and buy it. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. You have to think about your audience, and it varies whether you're supplying a need that people, have to fulfill, or it's a more spontaneous or luxurious or discretional sort of product. That message has to appeal correctly. The type of merchandising you do has to be correct for your audience. Second thing, and maybe it's the first thing sometimes, is be competitive. Why should a customer buy from you? I mean, the good news about e-commerce, of course, was that it gave a lot of businesses a lifeline, ability to reach customers when they couldn't bring them into the store. But equally, there's an awful lot more competition out there. So it's the same basic rules. Do you have a unique product, a niche product that appeals to a particular audience? Do you have a broad product selection? Are you the expert in curating the right collection of products or offers? Do you have the best price? Difficult in the online world, but you have to be competitive in price. You don't always have to be the cheapest, but you have to be competitive. And of course, service across the entire experience. And the entire experience is really, really important. So it's not just about a really nice web design, really nice pages. That's only part of the story. Your customer service has to be really good. Your logistics, so in other words, who your couriers are in terms of delivery, and how responsive you are to questions. There's a high bar for all of these things in the online space, and you have to meet that. And then a consequence of the fact that your competition is one click away is that you really do have to make life easy for the customer. It's not a case that you're the only game in town anymore, because the right geographic location was often a big advantage. Well, geography doesn't really apply, except maybe in the context of Brexit and where you purchase stuff online, but that's probably the subject of a whole other webinar. So you really have to make life easy for the customer. The navigation has to be clear. And I'll talk a little bit about site search later as well, because this is very often for general catalogs where people don't do a good job, and it's really, really low-hanging fruit that's missing. Contact details. So, can I find how to talk to the business if I have a problem or an issue? The other thing that we have to remember is once you go into the e-com space, you are in the content business. Now, this is generally the biggest shock for many new entrants into this space, because now your content, your product descriptions become your sales assistant. So how well you describe your products, what the imagery is like, review and educational videos around the product, you have to either source all of that material or create it yourself in order to make an e-commerce environment that works well. And again, this is something that's becoming improving all of the time. So if you don't keep at this, you will fall behind. And then finally, trust is the basis of all commerce. And, that's true in the e-commerce space as much as it is anywhere else. And you have to earn that trust. And that's where, things like even the simplest thing is having a physical phone number on your website. That's still the number one trust signals for many consumers, because they want to, even though they might never ring you, they want to have the reassurance that if something goes wrong, they can pick up the phone and talk to somebody, that it is actually a real business behind the website. And, that's also part of the merchandising and experience building that we do with many clients now, is that the About Us page that talks about the story of the people behind the business, etc. That's all really, really important in just making it less soulless, making the business appear real, and actually connecting with the audience. So trust, really, really important. Now, I generally think about a customer journey in 3 phases when it comes to e-commerce, and it sort of follows a learn, shop, buy process. And this is really useful, in terms of thinking about your e-commerce site, and the different pages and the functions that they serve and what needs to be the priority for those pages. So the first piece in terms of learn, and this is something you have to remember, is that in the first 2 to 3 seconds, generally speaking, somebody landing on a website is going to answer these 3 questions and one more. So the 3 questions generally that's going on in the back of your brain, even subconsciously, is, am I in the right store? Does this company have the right products that I'm looking for, the right services, the right solutions for what I'm looking for? That may even be followed up with, do they look like they have the capacity to, fulfill my need? And the third thing is, am I comfortable doing business with this site? Does it look professional? Is it secure? Is it in the right location, geographically or whatever? So they're going to answer these 3 questions in the first 2 to 3 seconds. So the first page that they land on, very often that's your home page, but increasingly it can also be your product page, has to, convince them, of that. So no different from the real world. You're not going to walk up to the shop in the top right hand of the slide here and expect to find a top end Armani suit in this outlet store. Impressions, image, how it appears does have a big impact, and that's can be manifested in a thing called bounce rate, which is basically when people land on your page, take one look at it, decide it's not for them, and leave. And that's why bounce rate, we'll talk a little bit about later, is an important metric. So once they're comfortable enough to proceed with your web experience, they get into the shopping process. And think of yourself, having gone into a store or a shop, and you're beginning to walk around, and you get into the process of trying to buy something. The next part of what you need to be able to deliver is, can I find the right products? What options do I have here? Like having a very thin catalog, very few products, generally isn't a great experience. Can I compare products? And most importantly, can you help me choose correctly the right product for me? Because that's the essence of a really good sales assistant, and that's the role your store has to perform. So the biggest mistake I often see, particularly with people with a large catalog, is they basically want to throw everything at every page, in the hope that the customer will buy something. And, what happens there very often is that we have too much choice. Too much choice actually can be overwhelming, and then we end up not making the decision and leaving. So you have to be able to surface the right products at the right time for your audience. And there are techniques and simple rules to follow when you're trying to think about that. And then finally, having selected something that I want to buy, no different, than in the supermarket where when you look up and there's a long queue at the checkout, you're just saying, am I or what? It's the same thing here when we get to the checkout process. Can I buy this easy? Is it easy to check out? Can I pay for it? And can I pay for it with my preferred payment method? So, you look at the average statistics, for example, 8 to 10% of people will use PayPal in this market, and it varies by market. So, do you offer PayPal? Not that if you don't offer PayPal, they absolutely won't buy for you, but we know that by adding more payment methods to your checkout process, it will improve your conversion rate. And then finally, how will it get to me? Do we have at least decent shipping options? We all can't compete necessarily with same day delivery or next day delivery like Amazon Prime, but it needs to be within 24, 48 hours if possible, because that's what we've been conditioned to expect from some of the leading players. And then, beautiful is nice, but not essential. And I say this, excuse me. And I say this because very often a lot of people spend a huge amount of time, getting nice big images, on the layouts and that sort of stuff. But if your site is not simple, if it's not clear, if it doesn't have the right functionality, that's the essential part. And that's probably even the harder part when it compared to actually how well it looks. And the old example I would have used here would have been, for many, many years, the Ryanair site was not the prettiest site by any stretch of the imagination. but it was extremely successful because the value proposition of what it was offering to his audience was very, very compelling and very, very effective. And that goes back to my original, slide that talked about, e-commerce or success in any of these fields from a business perspective depends on having a competitive and correct value proposition for your audience. Okay, so let's move on to looking at the nuts and bolts of what makes e-commerce successful. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind. On one very simple level, e-commerce is a very simple equation. Its revenue is equal to the amount of traffic that you have, multiplied by your conversion rate, which are the number of people who actually purchase, multiplied by your average order value. And for me, a successful e-commerce site is simply one that grows revenue sustainably year on year. And it's a constant process of evolution, but it's growing as you move forward. Now, the challenge that people, and a lot of what we'll spend the next little while talking about, is that all of these variables interact with each other. So for example, I can improve my conversion rate overnight by obviously dropping my price or by dropping a series of offers into an affiliate network with a big discount, etc. But of course, as soon as I do that, my average order value goes down dramatically. So my overall revenue growth is impacted. Likewise, we can grow traffic through different sources significantly or maybe quickly. We can buy a lot of traffic. But if that traffic doesn't convert at the same rate, well, then again, my overall revenue will struggle to grow. So you have to understand how these different metrics interact with each other. And if you do something in one space, to make sure that you're not allowing one of the other metrics to go backwards. And that very often is the challenge with actually having an e-commerce site that succeeds and that grows effectively. So what are the metrics that we're going to sort of measure and look at in some greater detail? So these are the 7 that we'll spend some time talking about. And to be honest, each of them would merit an entire webinar in its own right. So what we're going to do is basically explain what they are, look at some examples and give some suggestions as to where, if this is what you think your problem is or where you're challenged, then these are some suggestions as to how you might actually go about addressing these particular concerns. So the first group on the website really impact primarily conversion rate in the first instance, but obviously average order value itself as a key metric. And then on the audience side, things like lifetime customer value, which is something you can now calculate because you know every customer that's interacting with you. But it's a really important metric to understand for the overall health of your business. And then customer growth and email performance. Email is one of those underrated, or let's say less sexy marketing tactics that people talk about. But it remains the highest return on investment typically comes from email campaigns. So if you're not doing that well, if you're not growing your customer database, you're really missing one of the key levers to help you grow your business. And then we look at your overall traffic source mix and where your actual traffic is coming from. So conversion rate is a really important metric to look at. On average, conversion rates across e-commerce sites is about 2.85%, somewhere between there and 3%. So straight off the bat, if your overall site is not converting at least at that rate, you know you're generally speaking below average. And the problem that gives you is that everything else becomes more expensive. So you need more traffic. Excuse me. You need more traffic in order to grow your order volume, or you need larger average order values to grow your revenue. And both of those can be difficult. Traffic, generally speaking, it's much easier to double your conversion rate than double your traffic volume. Even if doubling your conversion rate is a challenge. So the first thing and the first place I would generally start is looking at the overall conversion rate of the site and how it's performing. Because unless you get that right, everything else will really be an uphill struggle. And a lot of these things, because they're within your control, you have the ability to at least influence them. So how do we tackle the problem of conversion rate? Well, it's easier if you break it down into different sections and phases, a bit like the learn, shop, buy process we talked about earlier. So the first part of that journey is your add to basket rate. Now, again, this is a metric that you'll find in your Google Analytics. And I should say that if you're not living in your analytics account and understanding all of these metrics, then again, this is a good reason why your e-commerce business may not be progressing at the way it should be, because you really have to be focused on the metrics. So the first one to look at is your add to basket rate. And these are suggested sort of guidelines of where that needs to be. So if your add to basket rate is not in or around 10, 11%, then you have a problem. Once people add stuff to the basket, then at least half of those people, like 55, 60%, should initiate the checkout process. And then once they're in the checkout process, you need to make sure that you've got most of those, customers, they've got their wallet out, they have the stuff in the basket, make sure that they check out. The slide, bottom part of this slide is really around, is an example from a client where they have quite a substantial amount of traffic. And again, we're sort of looking at this question of how do we grow revenue? How do we make it more successful? So straight off the bat, the client was thinking about, changing the site, upgrading, what it looked like, etc. But we can see from his metrics here, he's already running at 10.3% with sessions adding to basket. So that tells me, at least the site is performing well on that space. So that's not where he needs to focus at the moment. He's at the point where driving additional traffic to the site will probably grow revenue quite efficiently. For sure, in the very last stage, in terms of sessions with transactions, that running at 52% is a little bit behind. So there are probably a couple of things we would want to go look at in the end of the checkout process here. But very quickly, by looking at these metrics, we can sort of get an idea of what's working well and what we need to look at. Now, this is another example, a very new store, a very new client. It's less than a couple of months. It's only 4 or 5 months into its existence. And they were, they had a conversion rate of about 1.5%, which immediately tells me, okay, we need to go look at this. Again, the same sort of thing. The front end of the catalog, the homepage, etc., looked to be performing reasonably well because add to basket was good. But the checkout process was obviously a problem when you look at the later metrics, particularly at 17%, of those who added a product to the basket actually checking out. What that allowed us to do was actually go back and look at the checkout pages very, very specifically, because now we had a focus and a hint, because sometimes you only see what you're looking for. So because we had this guide, we looked critically at his checkout process, and for sure there was an additional step that didn't need to be there. The language changed from one screen to the other, which would normally be confusing to a consumer. So very quickly, we're able to focus in on, we need to fix the last 2 to 3 steps of the checkout process and put that in place and see if that improves the overall conversion rate. And that's the power of some of these metrics in terms of it gets underneath the overall average. So, knowing that your conversion rate is 1.6% is one thing. Knowing where to actually dig in and start to work in terms of fixing that is sometimes another thing. And that's why I like this metric particularly, because it allows me to break up that process. So when we see a client with a problem in the add to basket sort of step, what does that prompt us in terms of trying to fix the problem? You know, we would generally, you know, is the value proposition, is it clear? You know, does it match your buyer? We need to go back to that first principles. Navigation, you know, is it fast and easy? And does it work on mobile? Now, this is a point that many people miss, that over half your traffic typically comes from mobile these days. Another measurement that you can find in Google Analytics very easily. So they spend business owners very often only look at the desktop version of their e-commerce site, when actually they should be looking at the mobile version more often. When we think about that, you know, you can actually understand and see your conversion rate by mobile device in Google Analytics. And again, that's a really good place to go look to find problems. When we think about trying to solve this problem, bounce rate becomes important, but not just your overall site bounce rate. And bounce rate, by the way, is when somebody visits your website, doesn't engage with anything, doesn't click, doesn't take any further steps, and leaves. So they used to say that they came, they puked, they left. So you really don't want your bounce rate. You need to focus on that at times. And different pages will have different bounce rates. So typically you want that on your homepage to be below 30%, even below 25 if you can make it. And we would generally have a framework for looking at home pages on the right-hand side here. So, you know, the header, the footer, and again, you know, there's detail behind all of these that you need to understand, but it needs to, generally speaking, good home pages sort of follow this type of breakout that is easy for the customer to follow and works well on mobile. Merchandising and offers in terms of trying to convince people to actually put stuff in their basket. And then internal site search for different types of retailers and businesses, you know, whether you've got a large catalog or a small niche catalog with new products. This is really important, particularly if you have a large catalog, you know, like a retailer or wherever. We're educated to use internal site search by sites like Amazon and eBay. I mean, I can't remember the last time I ever used the navigation to find anything in Amazon. I just go straight to the search box, type in whatever I'm looking for, and then I work with the page it gives me. So again, typically people who use site search on average, you know, will see a 3 to 4 times higher conversion rate than other users. So this can be anywhere from 8 to 10% of your total traffic. So again, if you focus in on that 8 to 10% of your traffic, if they convert to 3 to 4 times your normal traffic, that gives you a big lift in your overall conversion rate and what happens. So that's add to basket. So moving on to the next one, and really this is very simple in terms of slow speed kills. Only in this case, it's slow site speeds that kills performance. So the basic metric here is that all of your pages should load in less than 3 seconds. I mean, that's sort of the benchmark that we have at the moment. And for every second, you know, over the next, you know, 4, 5, 6 seconds, you know, you can expect to see a 7 to 10% decrease in your conversion rate. And we've measured that. I've measured that particularly on our own site when we were working with it, because page load times was a problem. And we could see anytime that our performance dropped, our conversion rate dropped correspondingly. The bad news, or the other news flash of this, is, you know, unfortunately, everybody has a high expectation of speed on everything from service response to shipping, etc. So it sort of goes with the territory. So how do you investigate that? Now, again, Google Analytics provides an awful lot of useful data, but just be careful, it's not always the most reliable. So very often you have to have a different tool in your toolbox to actually go really get under it. But the right-hand side gives you what Google Analytics will give you. So this is a client where, when we look at it, overall their average page load time is 3.27 seconds, so pretty okay. We're in the right ballpark here. But when we go by, we can also analyze that by page. And you can see here that, you know, there are 2 pages particularly that perform worse than the average. You know, we've got a product here with 1,500 page views that's 20% slower. So I'd be looking at the conversion rate on that page. I'd be looking at why is that page loading slower? In this case, it was because of a particularly big image they had in the product description, which just wasn't optimized, which needs to be fixed. And so again, you can go pick the particularly priority product pages, the ones that you know need to convert, and make sure they're loading quickly and working fast. There's a double whammy in that Google's page speed, as well as being a problem, as well as being a problem for humans, it's a problem for Google. So Google will penalize your site in terms of how it presents it in search rankings if it's slow. So not only will people experience it badly, but they won't even find it because Google won't show it if it considers it to be slow. And I've just put a couple of other examples of why slow is a tool. Google has a separate page speed insights tool, and GT metrics are tools that people can use to working with the web developer to actually understand what is wrong with their particular pages and how to improve the speed. So average order value is the next one. And it really is a key health indicator, but you have to probably measure this over a long period of time because you may, for a variety of reasons, see fluctuations in the short term, whether it's promotional periods, sale periods, etc. A couple of things here I'd say. If your store has an average order value under 50 euros, then life is going to be a little bit difficult and challenging. And I say that because once you start to, because most successful e-commerce sites needs to drive some level of traffic, therefore needs to engage in either paid search, paid social, or whatever. And obviously, assuming that you're working on a margin of 20-25%, if you want to have your cost per acquisition less than 5-6%, it doesn't leave much room in terms of the cost per click that you're able to afford, and therefore stores where you have less than an average order value just have to work harder to figure out how to get traffic in and how to convert them well. That's, and those sort of stores, because they're, let's say, generally, a 20 euro purchase is more an impulse purchase. Once you get over 30, it gets a little bit more considered. So you have to be able to compensate here with a better conversion rate, for example, so your traffic doesn't cost you inordinate amounts of money. There's a huge variation, though, in average order value, but we tend to look at, look, if you've got a high order value, you can survive with 1.5 purchases per year. If you have a low order value, then you need to be increasing your purchase frequency, you need to be increasing your conversion rate. And it's very difficult, just given the mix of different businesses, to give an overall recipe of how to fix this, but typically you're looking at bundles. There are an awful lot of tools out there that will do product recommendations based on what people have purchased before. The Amazon, original, one of the things that really sparked Amazon's growth was a very simple algorithm that looked at your shopping basket. It looked at 40% of it and went off and found shopping baskets that had that 40% and simply showed you the other 60% from those baskets. And that worked really effectively as a recommendations engine originally. We look at upsells, look at post-purchase upsells, various things to try and, make sure that your average order value is at least robust and hopefully increasing over time. The analytics chart here is from a client who's actually seen some really solid and good growth, particularly on the right-hand side of this curve, or the right-hand side of this slide. Very good conversion rate at 6.5% or 6.23%. Their average order value is over the 50 euros mark, but obviously the conversion rate really helps them here. But the point, I guess, of this graph is if we look at average order value has been generally pretty stable, although slightly concerned that it's gone down a little bit. But because we have strong revenue growth, it sort of helps ease the concern about that. But you can certainly see the fluctuation on things like e-commerce conversion rate. So what we've settled into at the moment with this client is a pretty stable e-com e-com conversion rate, and the dip on the right hand side is the post-Christmas period this year, which because of deliveries and all of that sort of stuff, and we would have backed off, so we're not concerned about that particular dip. But as we've now settled into a consistent, robust average order rate, a really solid e-commerce rate, and now we're focusing on driving additional traffic in order to drive revenue. So just the way some of these different metrics interact with each other. So the final one in this section is basket order rate. And we hear a lot about cart abandonment. We hear about cart abandonment programs. So you all possibly would have seen the email you get if you've put a product in the cart and then not checked out, etc. So these are all sort of tactics to try and reduce your cart abandonment rate. On the right hand side though here, if we see that you know, sessions with transactions metric being really low, this is where we start to look. You know, do you have a long or a complex checkout process? Are there more pages or more steps in it than there needs to be? Interesting enough, if you force a customer to create an account, very often that can have a significant impact on your conversion rate. You need to allow people to actually check out without creating an account. Creating an account is good for sites that have, you know, a lot of purchase frequency and recurring customers. Obviously, you really want to get that first customer, that first purchase. So let's make sure that that's optimized well for that. And you'll see some of the other examples or things that cause problems in this space. So where do we look for improvements? Well, things like, you know, trying to remove any distractions when you get the customer at the checkout page. You know, so take away any other navigation links. You don't want them going back looking at other stuff. You want them, you know, get their credit card out, purchase and checkout. If you can reduce it to a one-page checkout, that works really well. You can have a long scroll page because it's much easier to scroll and fill out a page on mobile than it is to be clicking around pages. Multiple payment options and clarity around shipping and when the customer can expect it is really, really important. So again, if we think basket order rate is one of the metrics, or if that is one of the metrics that's below par, then this is where we would sort of start to look at in terms of finding the problem and trying to find a solution. Okay, so that leaves us, that covers all of the, you know, the critical sort of website metrics in terms of conversion that you need to look at. Now, I say the critical ones because there are lots of other metrics available to you, lots of other information available to you. And that's the beauty of e-commerce because of the data you can collect on what's happening and then analyze that to understand what's happening. But it can also be a curse because, you know, people spend all sorts of amount of time looking at all sorts of data and not knowing what to focus on. And that's really why I think if you focus in on these 3 or 4, ensure that they're growing and you're taking steps to improve them, then that's a really good foundation to build the rest of your success on. A good converting website is the basis of a successful e-commerce business, really. But the other half of the conversion equation is the audience and the customer that you have. Now, this is a metric, lifetime customer value, that very often for people who have a traditional business, they struggle a little bit to try and understand, like a traditional retail business can struggle to sort of understand what this looks like. And it's really looking at your customer purchase behavior. How often do they purchase and for how much? And it's not an analytics, so it does require some extra work to actually get it. But first things first, track this. And not only that, understand their characteristics as well. You know, so, you know, what was their first purchase? Which channel? Is there a difference? Is the lifetime value of a customer different depending which channel they came from? By that I mean, did they come from Facebook and social media as their first purchase? Did they come from Google search as their first purchase? Where did you actually acquire this customer in the first instance? How often do they purchase? So I would typically look anywhere from a 1 to 3 year lifetime value. Obviously for new stores, you might have that data, but start to collect it after 6 months so you have some picture of it. And then how soon does a customer purchase again after they've made their first purchase? And the reason this is really, really important in an e-com environment point of view is that knowing it allows you to make better and sometimes more aggressive, sometimes less aggressive, but sometimes more aggressive decisions or investments in how to go acquire new customers. Because, you know, success in business, success in e-commerce is about acquiring new customers or retaining the customers you have. And that's why you need to understand this particularly well. So for example, particularly if you have a low average order value, you need to know that, okay, if a purchase is 50 euros, does this customer purchase once a month for the next 3 years, which would suddenly make them, you know, an 1,800 euro customer rather than a 50 euro customer. And knowing that means that you can obviously invest a little bit more, maybe even have the first 2 orders break even or even loss making, knowing that having acquired that customer now, we will make up the difference over the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, whatever. So it's really, really important to be, and not so much back of an envelope thing, because very often that's what people do. Well, we think, you know, they'll buy 3 times and they'll, whatever. You will be surprised. You can be surprised when you start to dig into the data here and find out what this really looks like. Now, improving lifetime customer value. You have some unique tools from an e-commerce perspective available to you, but equally, it's a lot of things that good retailers and good business people have done for years. There's nothing new. And that's sort of loyalty schemes, incentives, etc. But what you can do here in terms of post-purchase campaigns to say thank you, you know, this is, you know, you have the email address, you can thank the customer for purchasing, you know, after they've received the product. Reviews is really important in terms of staying in touch with your customer, understanding what they found good, ask them to do a review. They become invested, you know, in your success, you know, the more that you involve them in it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about email later on, but really it's about communicating with your customer in as many different ways as you can and as frequently as you can without being annoying. So depending on the product type, you know, you can send, you know, information about how to use the product well, hints and tips type thing. That's a non-selling email that people actually find valuable and useful. And putting those sort of programs in place will help increase your lifetime value improvement. The other thing to think about is to understand what's the sweet spot for a second purchase. And a strange thing about this is that very often we find that it's sooner than you would think. The best example from my personal experience is we were working with, we were selling obviously at one point a category of gaming laptops, you know, to gamers. And these were high-end laptops retailing at around about 1,500 to 1,700 euros. The thing about that was we assumed that that would be a 2 to 3 year cycle before somebody would actually come back and purchase again. In reality, when we dug into the data, we discovered that there was quite a substantial segment of customers, about 20–25%, that came back and purchased a new gaming machine within 6 to 8 months of their initial purchase. Now, that was much more frequently than we expected. Now, we had to do a little bit of work to identify that niche a little bit more. But having found that and then understanding that and able to work with it, again, we were able to drive incremental revenue. But it was surprisingly sooner than we expected. Okay, so moving on to the next topic after average or lifetime value is email and database size. And it comes to one of the questions that just come in, so about email and collecting addresses. So we will address that as part of this, this particular topic here. Relationships are built on communication. And you also need to understand if your customer base is growing or not. So even if your revenues, remaining is stable or growing slightly, are you growing your new customers on a 6-monthly sort of cycle? And that's really, really important. Now, when it comes to growing your email database, email subscription can be an easier conversion in the first instance than a purchase. The reality is that, we said 3% conversion rate so we'll have 97 visitors out of 100 that won't purchase on their first visit. But can you get 3, 4, 5% of those to actually leave you an email address and to start a communication or a conversation with you? And the way to do that is to simply offer something of value to the customer, while they're on your site or that they're, about to exit. So, for example, you very often see, in the footer, subscribe to email, leave your email address and we'll send you email. Not many people want more email as a thing in itself. In fact, I'd go as far as to say nobody wants more email for a thing in itself. But if that was, depending on, but what you can do is change that into what we call an exit intent banner. So if you're about to leave, as you can pop up a banner and say, hi, just before you leave, we've put this guide together for people who are shopping for, wherever your product is, and offer them something of value. And it can be as simple as a video or a PDF or something like that. And just ask them, leave your email address and we will send you this piece of content. And that can be very, very, that can increase your email signups quite significantly. And then the trick is to obviously put that collection of emails that you collect through a pre-purchase sequence. And again, that can't be, buy, but it's to build a relation, introduce your brand, introduce your company, what you do, even the people behind it. Is there social proof why people purchase or transact with you? Is there stuff about the product that, maybe the person is not yet aware of? So you're basically educating, you're talking to the customer. Think about a normal human interaction. Somebody walks up to you at a party or a bar, if we ever remember being in a bar or get back to it, if they walk up to you and start trying to sell you something in the first out of their mouth, then you're going to walk away or certainly shut the conversation down fairly quickly. But if they come up and they start talking about something that's of interest to you, then you have an ability to develop that conversation and then earn the right to sell them later down the road. So basically, when we think about the type of email that we're sending out to particularly e-commerce clients, a lot of it has got to be around about building trust, sharing social proof, how-tos, how you use the product, how you assemble it, all of that sort of stuff. And then even just regular in-touch conversations with people who have purchased before, maybe haven't purchased in a while. And of course, discounts, promotions, offers are part of the mix, but they're 20% of the mix, not 80% of it, if you can make that. The other thing to remember about email, and this is something that I certainly found out, was that the email revenue sometimes shows up in other channels. And for example, we would send out an email on a Thursday this week about a particular product, which would have a certain amount of revenue attributed to that email. People would have clicked on it, purchased the product. But what we understood afterwards was the search volume for that product over the next week would actually increase. And this was people who read the email, yeah, that sounds an interesting product, didn't do anything with the email there and then, but over the weekend or early next week, they went back in, searched for the product, and then purchased it on that search session. So what was happening was the email was triggering that process. And if we didn't send the email in the first place, well, then that search wouldn't have happened and we wouldn't have got that order in the search channel in the following week. So you have to understand also how the different channels interact with each other, and that's called attribution modeling, and it's a useful tool to have in your kit bag. So for many successful email or e-commerce stores, email can represent anywhere between 10 to 20% of your revenue, and it's a very cost-effective channel. And that's why growing that email database is really, really important, and doing it in a controlled and good way. And quality is always better than quantity, even though I'm talking about growing the numbers here primarily. And you have to manage consent correctly. GDPR is a bonus if you do it right, rather than looking at it as a problem. And then again, givers gain in this case. So the more valuable, the more useful you can be to your audience, the more they will reward you in the end. And that brings us to the final metric that we look at, which is traffic sources. Now, where your traffic comes from absolutely varies depending on the type of product that you're selling or the type of site that you are. But I think this is something that I always look at, with a client in the initial areas and just ask the questions about it. In most cases, particularly for products that serve a particular need, search traffic is your best converting and your most important channels. And if you look at really successful sites, generally speaking, 50 to 60% of the traffic mix is between organic and paid search. Now, of course, if you're maybe a luxury product or a more discretionary spend, you can build a lot of good traffic on social. And if it's well targeted, it will convert particularly well. But remember, on social and paid, you're paying for every click, and that's the beauty of organic. Organic is free traffic from the point of view you don't have to pay for the click, but it's not free because you have to put in effort to make your organic search engine traffic to increase and to improve it. And the other challenge with organic is that it takes 6 to 12 months to actually improve it. It is a long-term burn, but that just makes it much more important to focus on it early on in the game and get it right early. So when you're looking at building success into your e-commerce environment, you have to factor in a certain percentage of your revenue to drive traffic. There's very few sites that, just everybody knows about them, everybody just uses them by default or wherever. You have to factor into your P&L what it is that you're going to reinvest back in the business to go drive traffic to your site in order to grow your revenue and to continue your business growing. When you're looking at that, then I would generally say maximize the hot channels first. And by hot channels, I mean those who are closest to the bottom of the funnel, closest to when people who are looking to buy. So people who go into Google and search for a product, they're given a pretty strong signal that they're in the market to buy something. And that's the power of organic and paid search and shopping ads. A similar channel that we would use, again, depending on the product, is affiliate networks. So these are, sites like Top Cashback, Nectar, Quidco, etc. They're loyalty schemes. So a bit like Tesco Club Rewards, Super Value Rewards, those type of programs, that type of thing. Where if you spend money with these, going through these sites, you can get cash back in your account, etc. The beauty of affiliate networks is you only pay for when a purchase is made. So it's a commission-based program. So you've made the purchase. The challenge is that very often they're always looking for discounts, etc., which again can have an impact on your average order value and your revenue. So once you've maximized search in terms of organic and then paid and shopping, then you can move up the chain a little bit in terms of email, organic social, and retargeting your website visitors. So these are all people who know you, at least superficially, and who might consider buying from you. So they're an easier audience to convince to actually come back and purchase from you. And then finally, if you've maximized all of those, then you need to grow your pool. You need to grow that awareness part at the top of the funnel. And that's where you have to go out and educate people who don't know who you are. Very often people, they look for the conversion first, but most of the social campaigns or display campaigns that are successful, spend an awful lot of their time and energy in the first instance educating and introducing people, because there's lower cost per clicks, etc., to do that. But if you don't do that, then that audience just never warms up. It never understands who you are, and you can't really target or convert it. So just a couple of final things on search in terms of what to look for in your search engine optimization. So site structure is really important, clean URLs, The product name should always be in your product URL, and the product URL should be as clean as possible. That gives you the best chance of Google ranking you for that product. You need to optimize your product pages. So they should talk about the product. The product descriptions need to be rich, with plenty of relevant content and advice. And then, of course, backlinks. So make sure that all the various business directories, link back to your site, because again, Google gives you credit for all the sites, all the good quality sites, I would say, that link back to your site. It gives you more authority in the market. Paid search, the challenge is scaling it affordably, and that's about having the right campaign structure in place. So, we would focus on brand campaigns in the first instance. That's advertising on your brand's terms. Shopping, which is, the image ad you see at the top of the shopping page, have been a really fast growing source of traffic for people, generally more affordable than native search. So you have to, if you optimize your shopping campaigns, that can be really, really successful. And Google actually gives free shopping clicks as well. So there's a free campaign available to everybody now. They started in the middle of the pandemic last year in the US. It's now available worldwide. Now, it's not a huge amount of traffic, but look, any traffic you're getting for free, it's worth a little bit of effort to go get it. And then we would look at category campaigns for your different product categories, and dynamic search campaigns. It's where you tell Google, here's my site, you go figure out what I'm relevant for and what my audience looks like. And they're always worthwhile to test, and they're getting better. The other thing is Merchant Center is Google's process for taking your product catalog and making it available generally on the web. So you need to spend some time making sure that your product feeds are optimized and working well in there. And that's quite fiddly. It takes a bit of work. But again, if you get it right, it'll generate and improve your organic traffic as well. So with a bit of work, rather than have to pay for everything, you get good traffic coming down afterwards. Okay, so coming up to the top of the hour, that's basically the 7 metrics that I think are really important for you to go focus on as you work through your e-commerce business and try and manage it towards the success. I think the important thing is to remember all of these things interact with each other. So it's a bit like, this graphic that you probably have seen before on the internet in various places, that, success isn't always a straight line. You'll do things to increase your traffic. That might impact your average order value. Then you have to go back and tweak that a little bit. Go find, you'll update your site, test different pages to see how the conversion rate works. So it really is a process of constant iteration, and the constant iteration and constant checking of how you're doing. But if you focus on these 7 metrics, then I think you have a pretty good chance of understanding what will drive your success and how to make it successful going forward. So with that, I'll just close with these couple of thoughts. I would say understand your metrics, dive deeper than the average. So go into the granular detail on it. You're in the content business. Make sure that quality of your content, clarity is key, that it's clear. Focus on your customer experience. If you don't have a good customer experience, you really won't survive into the longer term. Your site is always a work in progress, I'm sorry, but it's going to take day in, day out work to keep improving it. And your design is only part of the story. You have to focus on the entire experience. So thank you for listening. I'll pause for for a minute or two to see if there's any questions. I think I've answered the email question okay, in terms of the email slide that came in. So I'll pause there for a minute or two. If there's any more questions, you can type them in the question and answer or the chat box now. Okay, doesn't look like there's any other questions this morning. So once again, folks, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. We will send on the slides and the recording so you can go back over it at your leisure. And with that, I'll close the webinar and thank you again, and wish you all the best of luck in moving your e-commerce environment forward. And if we can be of any further help, feel free to reach out, and we're certainly more than happy to have a conversation around any of these particular aspects that we discussed this morning. So thank you guys, and talk to you again.